Mr. Greyfinch's Garden by Bernard Lloyd and Coral Tulloch. Mr. Greyfinch moved house. He waved goodbye to his city flat and moved everything he owned to a cottage in the suburbs. It was a small house, but it was surrounded by a large garden. Mr. Greyfinch thought that all the people who lived in such a peaceful place must be kind and friendly. For the first few weeks, Mr. Greyfinch busied himself unpacking and sorting his small treasures until everything was in its proper place. Mr. Greyfinch would often sit in the early morning sun on the veranda and watch his garden. Someone before him, a long time ago, had planted orange, lemon and plum trees. Choco and passion fruit vines hung across neighbouring fences, and beneath the chili bushes there were sprawling clumps of herbs. Throughout the rains of spring, the summer's heat, the soft skies of autumn, and the mists of winter, Mr. Greyfinch watched. He saw the first blossoms on the cherry and wattle trees. He picked oranges and planted a vegetable patch which glittered red and green with the morning dew. But the best part of his garden was the large area of bush up the back. It was wild and tall and filled with wonderful scents and colours. He spent many hours wandering through it, and he came to know it well. Eventually, Mr. Greyfinch discovered that the bush had its own gardeners. He found bandicoots digging up roots before dawn and possums quietly nibbling on berries and vines at night. Birds came to drink the nectars. Even ants and worms were at work, burrowing their own paths through the soft soil. Mr. Greyfinch wondered, if birds and possums and bandicoots could eat from the bush, perhaps he could too. Of course, he knew he would have to be careful. Some of the plants might be dangerous for him to eat. Also, he didn't want to take food from the animals. He studied bush food. Soon he was planting more native trees and vines and carefully helping the bush to spread across his lawn. He still cared for the rest of his plants just as well, so that within a few years Mr. Greyfinch lived amid the most splendid garden, which provided him with a plentiful variety of delicacies and delights. Mr. Greyfinch was so busy that he hadn't noticed something very important. His neighbours often came to visit. They hadn't come to offer him a cup of tea or to have a friendly chat. They had come secretly to laugh. They hid behind fences and spied on him while he worked. They all looked the other way when he waved. In their houses at night, they gossiped about his garden and the things he treasured. They said he was strange and called him names. Possum pal and grass eater, they sniggered. In time, Mr. Greyfinch asked his neighbours to visit him, but each one always made an excuse. Mr. Greyfinch became lonely. He wanted to share his garden, so he decided to hold a garden party and invite the whole street. He hoped that this time they would not all refuse. The day of the party dawned bright, and the breeze was scented with flowering gums. Mr. Greyfinch had prepared a feast. Tables covered with green cloths were hidden throughout the garden. Flowers and ripe fruit, still on their branches, drooped across moss-covered plates. For each guest there was a poem and a taste treat of bush food. At 11, the first guests took their seats, and by 12 the entire neighbourhood had arrived. They felt ashamed and embarrassed when they discovered what Mr. Greyfinch had arranged for them, after they had always been so mean and cruel towards him. But Mr. Greyfinch was a gentle host, and he soon made them feel at ease. He led them one by one through the garden and explained what he was doing there. He showed them photographs of an owl and a koala eating from his hand. He read his poetry and told them stories around a fire where chestnuts were toasting. There were presents too, hats woven from cabbage palm fronds, herbal medicines and perfumes, flowers ground from seeds, glistening bottles of jams and chutneys. Everyone was amazed by the garden Mr. Greyfinch had created. They marvelled at how carefully he shared it with so many bush creatures. As the afternoon sky deepened and the party drew to a close, all the guests promised to visit again soon. There was even talk of making bush plots next to Mr. Greyfinch's garden so they could all share in the same delights. The guests parted in comfort and friendship. They realised that Mr. Greyfinch wasn't strange at all and that their mean gossiping had been wrong. They had all learnt something else. They had forgotten the happiness and beauty to be found in simple things. Mr. Greyfinch reminded them.